Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap Surveys and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we'll be looking at how different question styles can be used to keep your respondents engaged with a view to boosting your completion rates. As well as taking you through the different question types and styles available, I'm going to look at some ideas of why different question styles might be used and aim to give you some advice on how to keep your respondents engaged throughout the survey with the aim of reducing the number of people who drop out partway through. When thinking about designing your questionnaires and forms, there are of course lots of things to take into consideration. What are you trying to find out and why? This is probably the most obvious question, but equally often the least asked questions when creating a questionnaire. Take a step back and ask yourself what data you might get back from a question and what you might be able to do with it. If the answer is I'm not sure, the simple response is remove it from the questionnaire. This is something which as survey experts I don't think we do often enough. So question the person who's asking you to create the questionnaire. If not, the danger is we end up with a huge survey with many questions which probably don't flow and more importantly aren't actually used for anything after the event. How long should the survey be and how will it be completed? These are both very much intertwined. If someone is completing a questionnaire on their phone, which realistically accounts for a very large proportion of most surveys, especially if your questionnaire has been emailed or texted to them, it's quite likely you've just interrupted them. So you need to get the information from them as quickly and concisely as you can. In previous webinars we've discussed using routing and masking to assist with this. You could also choose to hide certain nice to know questions which you know are going to be viewed on a smartphone or in a scenario when you know time is of the essence. Who is your audience? It's vital to consider the terminology and language used throughout your surveys. Would images and image-led questions help or perhaps in some circumstances hinder the respondent? How might the respondent benefit? Consider the reason behind why a respondent would feel inclined to complete the survey. If there isn't much perceived benefit to them, you're already up against a losing battle. And this is where keeping them engaged is more important than ever. So let's take a look at some questionnaires and forms in action and see how you might make use of the different question styles available. For today's session, I'm mainly going to be running through some examples contained within a course evaluation survey. This sample survey is available to view on our website and I'll be giving you a link to it at the end of today's session. It's a long and comprehensive example of the different question styles available within Snap and also includes an extensive display of functionality throughout and particularly towards the end. For that reason, you can jump to a particular question or section. So I could jump and look at the carousel section. Equally, we can then start again and perhaps go and look at a different type of question. So maybe a multi-choice, etc., etc. But today we're going to work our way through from start to end. I'll skip over the first couple of pages because these are just referring to the different type of note variables that we have available. But I will just highlight the fact that it does point out that we have a text-only version available at the top of every page. And actually on that note, quite often when I'm showing people some of the more exciting question styles, including the image-led question types, I get told that they wouldn't be suitable as they aren't accessible. And to a certain extent, that is correct. Not all question styles are going to be suitable for people with visual disabilities, for example, as they might heavily rely on the visual element for that type of question. But that's why all our questionnaires and forms have the text-only link at the top. This is the first thing that's read out on the page by any narrating software and allows the respondent to move to a more accessible version of the survey should they choose. I'll give you a quick example. If I jump to maybe the map controls section. So here I can click on the different images, but as I said, at the top of every page, there's the text-only version, and this will simply convert it back to standard individual question styles, which are just easier to read for the text reading software. To give you another example, I go back to the start and look at a grid or matrix style question. Again, to make it easier for the narrating software to read that, these questions are broken up into individual questions. But let's go back to the start of the questionnaire and I'll jump straight to the dates section. So these are just standard questions which will use the native device control to bring up the calendar or clock which the respondent is used to seeing. So if I'm on an iPhone, I'm going to be getting the Apple calendar or clock. If I'm on a Samsung phone, then I'll be getting the Android equivalent. And my colleagues will probably be laughing right now as they know that I'm the very last BlackBerry phone user in the world, but I can assure you that even the BlackBerry calendar pops up, so I get to see what I'm used to seeing. The same native controls apply to Google and Edge. I'll skip through the single choice and multiple choice questions, apart from to say that we have got the options to put them in alphabetical order or randomized order, as well as making use of exclusive options. Drop-downs are very useful when you have a large list of activities. Again, popping them in alphabetical order is generally advisable, whilst keeping other or none of the above at the bottom. For grid questions, if you've got a series of related sub-questions like I have today, then compounding these into one larger grid might be suitable, rather than displaying them as two completely separate grids. In today's example, I've just got two grids, importance and satisfaction, but you may well combine it with some open grids, perhaps asking for some comments or numerical values alongside these tick boxes. So for example, you might have importance, satisfaction, and then perhaps spend as a numerical value down the side. Or maybe it's a further comments, and you're going to use routing to make those further comments questions pop up if someone gives one of these negative reviews. Moving on to open-ended questions. Here you can see I have a countdown timer at the bottom, or countdown character timer. And on the following page, I've made use of a postcode pattern. For those listening from outside the UK, a postcode is what you might know as a zip code or postal code. So I'm doing two things here. I'm checking to make sure that what data has been input is valid. So if I try and type in something which isn't valid, I get a message saying it's an invalid code. Also, you can see I was putting placeholder text just to guide the respondent as to what type of response is needed. We've got some validation and calculations going on here. So I can type in a number 3. Equally, I can type in the word 2. So it's allowing for a variety of different sort of formats to be input, but also it's calculating the total as well. Next, we have some open style questions. So here I can choose a number of different options, including other, and then traditionally you'd have the sort of please specify underneath. But if we move on to the next question, it's particularly useful where you've got a number of different other or further questions or further information questions to have the question appearing alongside the original tick box. That way the attention for the person filling it in is kept within that tick box as opposed to ticking a box and then having to move down the bottom to enter the additional information. Our drag and drop questions are both engaging, and when you make use of the ranking style, which is what the next example is, it also ensures that the data you get back is clean and tidy, ready for analysis. And by that I mean that here I've set that you can only choose 3 options, and you can see if I try and choose a 4th one, it doesn't let me. Equally, it doesn't let me choose more than 1 first and more than 1 second. And from the respondent's perspective, as they're completing it, it's helping them as they go along. If I decide that the course content is the most important factor, I can then forget about the course content and I just get a list of, okay, I've got another 5 or 6 options of these options, which is the next important, or price is the next important. Again, ignore those 2 and I'm just looking at what's remaining. Alternatively, if you don't want to make it quite so interactive, we can just make use of our ratings check style question. So I might say that the course content was the most important, followed by perhaps the instructor, and then perhaps I might say that the location was also very important, but you can see I've selected 2 seconds, so I need to change one of those to be a 3rd. Our next question style on display is a great one to use when you have a larger set of sort of answer labels or statements in my example here today. So you can see it jumps between the different statements as I'm filling them in, And this replaces a more traditional grid or matrix style question, which would end up looking very squashed on a smaller screen such as a mobile phone. The carousel style overcomes this and also works really well with images. So you could perhaps replace this text with images or logos instead of the sort of statement text that I've got today. Our Attach It feature allows a respondent to upload a file or a photo or a PDF, could be Excel, could be anything really. So I could upload an Excel file today. If you're using our offline interviewer app, which is used when you're out and about doing face-to-face interviewing, then the Attach It feature actually activates the device camera or perhaps the microphone here, as you can see, or you can make use of a signature. So you can record different signatures on it. Moving on to our image-led questions, these are a great way to bring your questionnaires and forms to life. They add an element of gamification to your survey, but can also provide a really useful aid to the respondent, helping them to tell what they're looking at. So if I go back, for example, to the previous question, yes, it brings meaning to what the words mean, but also they may well simply have forgotten the name of the person who was training them today. Again, people don't have to use these. Remember, they can always go back to the text-only version. Equally, if they don't want to slide, they can just type in a number. Now, the rest of this questionnaire is more about highlighting some additional features that can be added to your questions. Masking is a useful way of filtering down your answers. So today I've selected 3 different options: Access, Internet Browsers and PowerPoint. And those are now the 3 options I have at the bottom. But if we combine this with auto answer, it also means that unnecessary questions are skipped over. So for example, if I have 3 options, I need to select which I enjoyed the most. If I tick none of the above, obviously I've got no courses, so there's going to be no courses to choose from. Equally, if I only choose Excel, again, I don't need to tell Snap that Excel was my favourite course, because clearly it must have been my favourite because it was the only course. Static masking is a way of removing specific answers within a question. So in this example today, I've removed the not applicable from the training room. So people may not have entered the breakout room. They may have not made use of the catering on site, but assuming they weren't on the course, they must have been in the training room. So we'd kind of sort of force an answer there. In another scenario, these could be food types or foodstuffs, and these could be different sizes. And it may well be that some of these different foods aren't available in these different sizes. So it's a way of hiding some of the answers whilst maintaining the grid layout. I use static masking in projects that are running over a number of years. So for example, if we take this previous question, it may well be that this year we're not running the publisher course. So it's tempting to just remove that from the actual questionnaire full stop, but that would actually delete all of the old data as well. So it's generally better to mask or hide options which are no longer relevant, which means the data stays in the background and also means you can always reinstate it in the future. We've already talked about exclusive use, patterns, validation, and placeholder text. This next little example based around ordering. So here I've randomized this list to make sure that the same options aren't always at the beginning. But using routing, we're asking for 3 options. So if I choose 3 options, that's all I can choose. If I try and choose a 4th, I can't. If I only choose 1 option and tick something else, I can then type in perhaps joy, and then I can then type in humour. If on the other hand I'd taken out emotional, then actually I can add a 3rd one. A timer can be added to a page, which either limits how long you can remain on that page or can force you to stay on that page for a specified amount of time. Now, this might seem a bit of a strange or odd thing to want to do, but to give you a real-life example, I run a children's football club. As part of that, every few years I need to take an online course which involves me watching some very mundane videos, followed by some very obvious questions such as, was it okay for the coach to swear at that child? Now, having run a club for about 15 years, and even if I hadn't, I can answer all those questions in about 3 minutes without the need to watch those many videos. And often that's exactly what I do. But really the software should be making sure that I can't skip over onto the next question until such time as I've at least pretended to watch those videos. If the Football Association is listening, I did of course make all that up for the purpose of a good example. But back to the survey. If I can see the countdown timer is going to force me to move on in just a moment. We won't wait for 50 seconds, don't worry. But if I choose the wrong answer, I've got some routing popping up to say, unfortunately, that's not right. If I now choose the correct answer, I've got a different message popping up to say that is correct. Now, if this was a test or a quiz, then potentially you might remove the back button and equally probably remove the start again button, but certainly from a testing perspective, it's quite useful having these two buttons on display. Text substitution is a good way of making your surveys more personal and relevant to the respondent. So I can type in a couple of options or tick a couple of options, but I can also give a response of other. And you can see using masking, I've got the 3 options below, including the text I just put in at the top. If you've got a database running in the background of this survey, then that can also be used to personalize the experience for the respondent, perhaps seeding in products that they previously bought, or maybe the department they work in, or perhaps dates of previous appointments, etc. Derived variables, they are a great tool which tend to get mainly used during the analysis stage with your data. So perhaps combining a number of different age groups into perhaps an under 40 category, but they can also be used to perform calculations which might then determine which questions or statements are then shown going forward. So here, if I type in 1 and then maybe 7, you can see I get a pop-up. So it's doing some calculations. Based on that calculation, there's 8 people in total and a 30% discount. If I change that to 9, you can see that's jumped up to 16 and a 40% discount. Now, slightly different example going on here. Again, I've got some calculations taking place. And based on the fact that at the moment I've run 2 courses over the last couple of years, I've not met my CPD, which stands for Continuous Personal Development Training Needs. So it's automatically seeded that I need to do some more training. If I say that I've then done 5 last year, the survey's determined that actually I've met my requirement, so I don't need to do any further actions. In this particular example, I've set it so the person filling in this survey can override that should they wish. You might decide that actually once a decision's set, then that question becomes read-only. An alert is an automated email sent to a specified email address, and that can be sent to multiple people that are specified in advance, or it could be that the person filling in the survey says who those emails are going to be sent to. So this can be a really useful way of automating a live project because the data gets sent off to those people as the moment that the survey is submitted, rather than having to sort of trawl through the data after the survey's closed. Adding media to your questionnaire can be a great way of getting lots of information across without the need to read an essay. I've actually sort of set it to mute today just so it doesn't get in the way. But it can also be an important tool when working with younger children, people with learning difficulties, or perhaps just where the respondent isn't using their mother tongue. And finally, this survey is set to send the respondent off to different locations depending on how they responded in the survey. Now, in today's simple example, it's just based on this final question, but again, it could be based upon a number of different answers throughout the survey. So when I press submit, it's going to send them off to the Snap Surveys homepage. But this is a really important function if you're ever running surveys in multiple languages. So if I was to complete my survey in English, I would obviously want to see an English thank you page, whereas if I was to complete the survey in Korean, I would be sent off to the Korean thank you page. Or indeed, you could send them off to wherever the survey designer wants to send them off. A more elaborate example would be sending them off to a follow-on survey, but at the same time perhaps seeding in data from that first survey into the follow-up survey. To finish off, I'm just going to open up a couple of additional surveys. and these are all based on sort of page transitions and button effects. Now, before I start, I should just say that because we are viewing this over Teams today, sometimes it does appear over Teams a little bit jumpy, but rest assured, if we weren't viewing this over Teams, it would be sort of behaving smoothly. So in this first example, I'm making use of two features. One is auto next, so it's automatically moving across to the next page without me having to press the next button. And the other feature is the horizontal page transition. So rather than sort of me scrolling or just the next page just appearing, it's sort of scrolling across. Now just notice the auto next only works on single response questions because I need to tell Snap when I've finished answering that question. Got a similar example. Now this one works the same, but this time it's going to be working its way vertically up the page. And this is particularly useful on smaller devices such as mobile phones. So if I make this look a little bit more like a mobile phone, so again, it's going to automatically transition up the page for the single response questions. For the multiple response, I do need to choose the next button. Just two more very quick examples to show you. The next two are based around checkboxes. So here the answers have a ripple effect. So as I'm making the selection, you can see it's just making it really obvious which answers are being selected. And this is very similar to something you can do on laptops and PCs, just to make it more obvious what's being selected. And I know I did this a few years back on my dad's laptop just because he couldn't quite tell where his cursor was and couldn't tell what he was clicking on. Similar example we've got for this one. This time the boxes are going to temporarily enlarge. I think this one works really well when you combine it with our show as buttons feature because we've got sort of three transitions effectively happening now. The boxes temporarily get larger, they change colour, and we're having the tick at the end. So again, nothing really to set the world on fire here, but they're all things that are going to help to assist with engagement, accessibility, and usability. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good overview of the different question types and styles that can be used in a questionnaire or form, as well as integrating a few nice features along the way. Making the effort to create an engaging survey that is seamless to complete obviously does take a bit more effort and time and thought, but it will really help to avoid the frustration on the part of your participants and will hopefully lead to getting more surveys fully completed, reducing the number of the inevitable dropouts. On screen now is a link and QR code which will direct you to a page on our website which covers the different question styles I've been showing you today. And at the bottom of that page is a link to the survey I was showing you earlier, so you're very welcome to have a play of that one and perhaps share it with your colleagues. That just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.